So John's probably most famous thing that he co-wrote was If,
Yeah.
with Malcolm McDowell, which is constantly voted one of the top 10 British films of all time.
Which he wrote when he was at college.
Which he wrote when he was at college. He was at Oxford.
Oxford, Jesus, yeah.
Hello, I am here with Suzanne Howlett, who is the daughter of John Howlett. John Howlett was friend, script writing mentor, an established writer in his own right, and he passed away in 2019, and I thought it'd be a wonderful moment just to capture what he meant to me. Tell me about your dear papa. Who was he?
He was a very larger-than-life character, very passionate in his writing and outside of his writing. So politically very passionate, always very active in the community, anything community, schools, education. He was very much present, very there.
Absolutely.
And always very, very dedicated to his writing. So he'd be up very early in the morning every day, writing.
Yeah.
And drinking. Well,
yeah.
Well, not very early, but
he
did get earlier as the years went on.
He was a man who had a party.
He did. Yeah.
Whether that was because was he half English, half Italian?
So his mother was Italian from Milan, and his father was English.
He was very proud of both countries.
Yes.
He would talk eloquently so much about his English side and his Italian side. I remember that.
And then he married a Sicilian.
Of course, he married a Sicilian, of course. I met Arda once, I think, in my entire life. But traditionally what would happen is that I'd meet John, we'd spend the afternoon talking about films, talking about his work, talking about my work, and different ideas that he had. I should probably talk about when I met him. There was a film called Darkness Falls, which is a film that he wrote, starring Ray Winston, and I went to the screening of the film, small British film, and I afterwards there was a drinks thing afterwards, and I met him, and we just got chatting, and I immediately liked him, and I must have been in my early 20s, and again we swapped numbers. And I phoned him up and said, "Can we meet?" And I said, "Can we meet for coffee and talk about script writing?" He said, "Coffee? You mean gin and tonic?" And I said, "Sorry, yes, gin and tonic." And we used to meet in Covent Garden. The bar's not there anymore, but it was on Long Acre. We'd traditionally go to this place and we'd meet. And what he would do two things. One, he would really push me in what do I mean by this, creating the universe. But he would also introduce me to people in the industry, like Joyce Hurley, for example. So he'd say to Joyce, who was one of the eminent female line producers, and then I'd get John's opinion of stuff, I'd get Joyce's opinion of stuff on filmmaking, and it was just hugely, hugely inspirational and incredible. Fast forward to obviously the books that he's writing, James Dean, Frank Sinatra, the other scripts he's working on.
He wrote so many books, to be honest, and did a lot of TV, theatre, even musicals. He wrote a musical on Lorca, which nothing ever came of it until now. But yeah, so many. And then in the end, in his final years, he wrote these, I don't know what you'd call it, not a trilogy, it's a double trilogy, it's 6 books.
A saga. A 6-part saga.
Which follow this love story, which starts in the First World War, which was very much something he'd always wanted to write, was something he was very passionate about. He grew up hearing those stories. He was born in the Second World War, so it was something he'd always wanted to write. And in those books, there are not only the stories he heard, but many family stories as well, which are woven in there. So you never quite knew with Dad what was fact and what was fiction.
Oh, well, you tell such a good story. I wrote a script called The Director, which is basically a combination of The Day of the Jackal and a film called Young Guns, right?
I think I remember.
Which with Emilio Estevez and Terence Stamp. Wasn't snobby. he wasn't like, at no point was he like, you know, well, you should really focus on these types of films, or that, you know, and not these types of films. He embraced, you know, everything.
It's because you weren't his son.
Well,
Did embrace. I have to say that both mum and dad were always very supportive.
Very supportive
of anything we did. Really.
So you could talk about something, and he'd go.
Yeah.
He would never do down a particular genre of cinema, or, you know, he'd encourage British cinema, Italian cinema, French cinema, you know, all types of different cinema. But I could give him something that was more like Hollywood, and he'd go, yeah, okay, let's look at that. So for every year I didn't make a feature, I wrote a film script, and for every year, you know, certainly in the early days, before I moved to America, I would send it to him. And there's one story I'll tell you that you won't know, but I turned to him and I said, I really want to make the director. I think we've been through it a number of times. I think it's pretty close now. And he said, right, where are you going to film it? And I said, I'm going to film it in this hotel in Brighton. And he then said, let's go there. You've got to really start to translate what's on the page to reality. So we did this road trip. You probably didn't know.
No.
This road trip to Brighton, right? And we ended up walking through the scenes. He took me to a restaurant called the English Restaurant in Brighton. Had fish and chips, you know. And again, such a rarity. I mean, maybe, you know, for script writers and novelists, I mean, maybe this is normally what happens. But for me, it was like that. Those days spent doing that really meant a lot to me and informed me and gave me the confidence to do what I'm doing now. So to dedicate the film to John Howlett is, you know, seemed right. I know that he would have been very proud.
Yeah.
And when we had our conversation, it was quite an emotional conversation. We had a conversation outside of the Odeon Leicester Square. And we both were standing there and talking about John with the film, you know, the cinema there. A wonderful moment, truly wonderful moment.
And may there be many more.
Oh, thank you. Fingers and toes crossed.
Yeah.